In this video we talk about Il Gioco di Tex, Texas game, a game about Tex. Now in American English, Tex is a word that you rarely use unless it is followed by Mex. But for Italians, Tex is different. Tex is the name of the most important, most famous character in Italian comics. Publications of stories about Tex started in the 1940s and they're still going strong. Every month you still have a new graphic novel, a new book of 100 pages of comics that have Tex as their protagonist. It's a Western comic, as I think you're probably starting to figure out. Yes, Italians, we have always been fascinated by the American West. Maybe because Italy is kind of like small and all like crowded, you're always bumping into people. The idea of the large spaces of the American West resonates with us as particularly exotic and appealing. So Tex is a cowboy. These are Western stories. And now, and I'm a big fan of Tex, by the way, and now finally there is a game in which I can play Tex. And this game, which is a dice and card game, one player, one team will control Tex and some of his allies, and they will try to defeat a selection of Tex's traditional villains, some of his arch nemesis. Now, a couple of things. First, the game can only be played by an even number of people. So when here it says 2 to 6, it really means 2, 4, or 6, for reasons that you will see later. Yes, you can't just assign 2 characters to a player to play and then 1 character each one of the team, or 2 players to play team 3. Doesn't work, and you will see why. Second, the game for now is only in Italian, unfortunately. So you're wondering, why am I speaking in English? I don't know, maybe you're curious about the game, you want to learn about how game design and how the game is designed, so feel free to keep watching. Maybe one day the game will be released in English with an English version, so there you go. I'm already getting ahead. I'm already going ahead with my homework of reviewing every game that exists or that I get the chance to play. And how about Italians? Italians speak English, so you Italian friends are gonna understand me. I don't have any doubt about that. We'll see. Il Gioco di Tex. Let's see how it works. In the middle of the table you have this board, which looks like an open graphic novel, really neat, and it is used to regulate various functions. Here we have an area with event cards. At the beginning of each turn you will flip an event face up, the event will influence what happens in that turn, and the game will be over when the last event is played. So the event deck also acts as a turn track, I guess, as a countdown track. An area with bonus bullets. You will want to get those extra bullets to pay for actions. Speaking of actions, you have an area with the generic action cards. These are cards that anyone can use, and you will need to spend a number of resources to play the card and implement the effect. And these are generic actions, meaning that any player can use them. Each player also has a small deck of unique actions. Up there we have, very important, the speed track. Depending on where your standee will be placed there, the beginning of a turn, well, that will determine the order in which players will go. Also, players will have to resolve an extra effect at the end of the turn based on the position of their standee. This player will have that effect, this player will have that effect, for example. Hospitals, 2 hospitals. This is where players place their dice. Players will use dice to perform actions. These dice also represent their quote-unquote health points. So when you're hit, for each hit that you receive, you move one of your dice to the hospital of your team. This is the hospital for the heroes. This is the hospital for the villains. Also, each time that a player is seriously wounded, that scores a point for the other team, for the team that inflicted the serious wound. This is the victory track. This token starts in the middle of the track. Here are the symbol for the heroes and here the one for the villains. When a character is seriously wounded, the token moves by 1 space in the direction of the team that inflicted the serious wound. If this marker is ever on your team symbol at the end of a turn, you win the game. Otherwise, at the end, at the end of the game, if you reach the end of the event deck, if that marker is on your side of the turn track, you also win the game. If it's a tie, then the tiebreaker is the player with the least dice in the hospital. Now, each player also has a personal board. This is how the boards for the heroes look. Oops, camera was almost falling. Last second rescue. Very adventurous. So each player has a board such as this one. The boards of the villains have a different design. They look like there is a Bowie Knight on the side, but still is the same idea. So each player has a personal play area in which you will place your deck of unique individual cards. If you're playing Tex Willer, this is your deck of cards. If you're playing Tex Willer's arch nemesis, Mephisto, then you will use these cards here. And then just to give you a sense of the other characters, the other villains, Tex aficionados may know them. We have El Muerto and Lucero. And as for the heroes, so we have two well-known allies of Tex, Tiger Jack and El Morisco. Now, what happens? What happens here? At the beginning of each round, of each turn, players all act at the same time. There are no, in this phase, there are no specific sub-phases. That is, each player grabs all of the dice that they still have in their active dice area from the previous turn, and you roll them, and you look at them, and some you like and some you don't like, and you roll them, and you re-roll them, and you roll and re-roll all the dice that you want. And again, as fast as possible, everybody's doing this at the same time. When you're satisfied with the symbols that you have, you take your standee and you place it in the leftmost free space of that area. By the way, there in the back you see that there are other of these styles, so pretty much here the game is set up with the speed track for 2 players. With more players, you will have more. You will have more things. Also, they would be in probably in a different order, just to give a sense of how it works. So when you're done with your dice, you place your standee there, and then the other players do that in order. When all the players in a team are done, the players in the other team only have one last re-roll, because otherwise if they just could re-roll ad infinitum forever, then they could just choose their dice and that would be boring. So at this point everybody has a pool of dice. It is entirely possible, by the way, that not all of your dice are there, because some have been sent to the hospital in an earlier turn. But we're generous and we say that we all have, at the beginning of the game, we all have all of our dice. Now, during your turn, you can do one of several things. And you can take one action per turn only, but there are several things that you can do. You can spend 2 horseshoes, and there is a reminder there, to change the present event. So you simply spend 2 horseshoes, you place it from your active dice area to your used dice area, and you trigger a new event, and now that becomes the active event for the current turn. That also means, however, that you're shortening the game by 1 turn, because remember, the event deck is also the turn track, the countdown clock. You can discard any 2 symbols, any combinations, place them in your used dice area to purchase an extra bullet, which you place on your personal board. Your personal board, and that you can use as a wild symbol. That is, when you will use symbols on your dice to activate cards, you can spend one of those as a wild one. In fact, well, actually, before we talk about playing cards, how about buying cards? With a cowboy hat symbol, you can buy a generic action and add it to your hand. Suppose we have a little hand of cards here. So one cowboy hat buys you a generic action. 2 cowboy hats, and you see a reminder here, 2 cowboy hats buy your personal action from your own personal deck. And these actions are thematically tailored to the character and also more powerful than normal actions, than generic actions. Finally, you get to play a card. Now, some cards have a lightning bolt symbol. classic. I want to show you that, of course. I can't just draw one. Some of the lightning bolt symbol, these are reaction cards. You can play them out of turn by spending the corresponding symbols. Same cards that don't have that symbol, you can play during your turn as your action. When you play an action, you play a card, you need to produce the corresponding symbols. You need to produce corresponding symbols. For example, here we have the horseshoe and the cowboy hat. Oh, what a coincidence, we have those. So I play this card, it's a personal card, so I put it in the personal discard pile. I spend the corresponding dice and I perform the action, which is an adversary moves one of the dice to the hospital. Pretty much, it's a wound. And they may be able to play a reaction card. If not, they take one of the dice from the personal area and they move it in the hospital. And that's pretty much the idea. You're playing cards to try to inflict damage on the opponent. You're saving some cards that will allow you to protect yourself against the opponent. Reaction cards, cards that will allow you to manipulate your dice, the usual thing. But the basic idea is that you're trying to inflict as many wounds as possible by forcing the opponent to move as many dice as possible to the hospital. When a character is left with only 2 dice, because all the other ones are in the hospital, then the character is seriously wounded, and that is how you inflict the famous serious wound. The character recovers all of their dice, but again, after they recover the hospital, there is still that point that has been scored by the other team. And you continue like this. Each turn you take an action, one of those actions that they mentioned, mainly to collect resources, to collect cards, to play cards, trying to seriously wound the opponent until one of the 2 teams has managed to meet their victory conditions. Tex, the comic books, is an adventure comic. It is the triumph of adventure. So you have shootouts, fistfights, you have traps, ambushes, train robberies, all of that stuff. And unfortunately, it is not in the game. The game does not feel adventurous at all. Unfortunately, it does not feel very exciting. Which could be when I started playing the game, in fact, I was very excited because there is an element, a part, which is exciting, which is the real-time phase of the turn in which you're rolling dice and you're trying to get the perfect balance between, well, these dice are good enough that I can do something with my cards, but I don't get stuck in a position that totally stinks on the turn track because some are very, very bad. So you start from the first positions giving you a bonus to the later ones giving you penalties. I like that idea. I like that a lot. And then I started using my dice to fuel powerful actions. No, actually I didn't. That is when the game started feeling underwhelming because, well, maybe I just did not roll the right numbers, and so not only was I the right symbol, so not only was I stuck in a bad position on the turn track, I also cannot do anything. So I'm spending my turn trading my dice for bonus bullets that maybe I will use next turn. And that's okay, fine. I just waste a turn that way, because frankly, if you're just trading that thing, it feels wasted. You're not having all that much fun. But it's a small thing. The next turn we go again, and maybe that happens again. God. Then finally, next turn, I get a chance to do something cool. I shoot at you, and you play a dodge. Oh, okay. And that happens over and over again. Basically, a problem that I have with this game is in the composition of the card. The deck should be more brutal. The deck should be should have more bullets. There aren't enough bullets in this game. People don't shoot often enough. Sometimes you take 2-3 turns just to be able to shoot a single bullet, maybe with a lot of bonus bullets, and the opponent dodges it or doesn't dodge it and then plays a card to recover. There are too many defensive cards and not enough offensive cards, and the result is then it feels like a slow war of attrition when I'm really building up resources. It feels almost like World War I wargaming. I'm piling up resources, people in my trenches, then I send them out. They don't do much, they get a lot of damage, and that's pretty much it. So there's this back and forth that doesn't really amount to much, and that is was very disappointing. Worse still, there can be a runaway leader problem because it's exciting. I'm rolling the dice and trying to get that balance, good symbols, but don't take long enough. However, if you're in a situation in which a player has a lot of cards and the other player doesn't have many, the player with a lot of cards doesn't have to be particularly finicky, doesn't have to be discriminating. Almost everything goes. Then you do that, and then because of that you also get in a position that will give you extra cards. So pretty much if I have a good number of cards, I roll the dice and say stop. Actually that's what I started doing in a game. I would just roll and be happy, and I was still able to do something. But even if I didn't do something, the very fact that my opponent kept stuck in bad positions was enough, because if I just say stop right away, boom, my opponent only gets a roll and possibly a re-roll. And maybe with the small number of cards that they have and those dice that they were able to roll but not to re-roll much, they're not able to do anything or almost anything. And then they use those useless symbols to get bonus bullets. So here's a problem. It's not a particularly good game. I mean, my friends and I got into that problem that we were performing all the actions, going through the motions, not really going anywhere, and at a certain point I realized that if I had an advantage of 2-3 cards, then I would simply not re-roll, and the gap between me and the opponents grew. Maybe, again, with a large number of players, with 6, then you have an advantage there, then you have balancing factors, but not with 2 or 4. With 2 or 4, the game just has these problems. But again, even then, well, if the game is good only at 6, I haven't tried at 6, it's good only at 6, well, it's not a very flexible game that you'll get to a table very often. That is exactly the number of players that you have. So, Il Gioco di Tex, Texas game, it's a great comic. The game is not so good, unfortunately. If you're curious about the comic and you are English speaker and you don't speak English, there is unfortunately only one graphic novel published by Dark Horse about Tex. It's called The Lonesome Rider, which is available in English and it's very good quality. A couple of issues of Tex were translated into English a long time ago, and I've been looking for them. Maybe if you are a collector and know if you can help me find them, I'd like to have them, to acquire them. I haven't been able to locate them. They're very rare, so that must also be a very small run. Which is a pity also, because Tex is a character actually is translating a lot of other languages, just not in English, but they have it in Brazil. It's a big phenomenon in Eastern Europe. In India they have Tex, in Turkey they have Tex, and unfortunately in North America they don't. And I hope they will at some point, because it's a really great game. It's a really great comic book. The game not so much.